Room in Zoom land. My name is Tom Coates, and welcome to the February 2022 edition of the Richmond Ions Community Group meeting. For those of you who are new to that group, first we welcome you. If you want to be on our mailing list, I know there are one or two people here at least who've not been here before. We have a yellow pad to be passed around for people to put their names and email addresses on for those who would like to get our monthly notices. And our group has been around since January of 1996. We're one of the older, if not the oldest, continuously operated community group in the entire IONS network. And IONS itself has been around since 1973. Started by Ed.D, who was an Apollo astronaut. He was the lunar landing module pilot for Apollo 14. And like several of those fellows who walked on the moon back in the 70s on the Apollo program, he had his own takeaway from the experience. He had a unity consciousness experience actually on the way back to Earth, seeing the Earth as a pale blue dot way off in space. And he decided right then and there to dedicate the rest of his life to exploring the frontiers of consciousness, especially the interface between science and spirit. And so IONS, which stands for Institute of Noetic Sciences, is a vehicle that he created for that purpose. It's a 501c3 organization based in Petaluma, California. And in the world of COVID, which we've been living with the last couple of years, IONS has opened itself up to more and more interface with the general public, and has, I think, weekly, every Friday afternoon programs. Friday afternoon for us is 11 a.m. California time, but they have online Zoom webinars that come on every Friday, and most of them pretty good. So I would highly recommend those, and also highly recommend anybody who wants to be a member of IONS, which requires a subscription, like being a member of the public radio station, or TV station, and so forth. But they do a lot of good. They support groups like us, and I recommend it. We don't have any such requirements for membership here. Membership here requires nothing other than showing up, and we welcome all who do. We do have expenses here and there, and so we pass a basket at each meeting and ask for a love offering from everybody who's here. I'm going to go ahead and put some chum in the basket right now to encourage those that are here to dig deeply into their wallets and their hearts to help us keep going. So there we are. Any other announcements that I've left out? We have our group is run by our steering committee. I'm on it. Bunny Carol Justin is on it. Martha Mullen is on it. Elizabeth Kuntz is our webmaster. And by the way, those who are not presently here or here in person can also donate to our existence by going online to our website, which is at richmondions.com. And there's a PayPal function on there. It's not too complicated. I've been able to figure out how to use it myself on occasion, and so if I can do it, I know anybody can do it. And I would encourage all those who are on Zoom to consider going on that and donating whatever strikes you as right, from $5 to $1 to $500, whatever feels good to you, and we would very much appreciate it. Any other announcements, Bonnie?
Sally Youngs.
Oh, Sally Youngs, that's right. Sally Youngs is our treasurer, is also a part of our steering committee, and not here today, but for those who are neither here nor willing to use a credit card to pay online through PayPal, the other option that you can exercise if you wish is to write a check. and you can write it either to our treasurer, Sally Youngs, or to Richmond Ions, and mail it to me at the address shown on the flyer that goes in each month on the email. And so there are a number within the group that prefer to do it that way, and we welcome donations in whatever form they come. So thank you for that. Anything else? Okay. Now, one of the reasons we have been blessed to have lasted as long as we have is that we have been also blessed to have had, through the years, consistently excellent presenters to our group, and we've had people from other countries, we've had from all over the United States and so forth who presented here, and today's speaker is one of the best ever. She's been a speaker for us in 2 previous occasions, I believe in 2015 and in September in 2017 in April or May or something like that. And her name is Elena Mustakova, sometimes known as Elena Mustakova-Possardt. And she has her husband Earl with her, who is Earl Possardt. And so we'll call her Elena Mustakova-Possardt today, since her husband is with her. But she has had an extremely distinguished career as I put it in the flyer. She is an author, a clinical researcher, a developmental psychologist, and spiritually oriented psychotherapist, a philosopher, and a metaphysician. And I use all of those words very carefully, but they all apply in spades to our speaker today. She has recently published a new book. This one is called Global Unitive Healing. I'm about 2/3 of the way through it. It's an absolutely wonderful read. I recommend it to anyone. I don't know that you have any copies with you.
I actually have 4 copies.
All right, so she has several copies with her today if anybody wants to buy them from her here today. But if you can't get them here, you can get them on Amazon or other sources. And it's a great book. And you know before you open it that's the case, because there's a 20-page or so foreword by Ken Wilber, who many of you have heard me speak about. He's probably the greatest living American philosopher. And he is the one who has invented the concept of integral theory and so forth, the 4 quadrants that you've seen me put up diagrams of in talks that I've given. And there's also an afterword by Claudia Weiss, who is the chairman, or chairperson, I guess I should say, of IONS in California. And so you don't get these kinds of involvement from other people unless you've got a superlative piece of work that you're dealing with, and that's what we have here today with our speaker, Elena Mustakova. So without further ado, I give you our speaker, and you've got the floor until noon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And by the way, this is probably, she told me, will be her last appearance because she's a native of Bulgaria, and she and Earl are relocating in May to Andalusia in southern Spain. And so unless we can happen to snag her again in the future when they happen to be visiting the States, we won't see her again here. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Friends, it's always such a delight for me to be here, and such a delight to connect with dear Tom, who has inspired me a lot with his service and discernment over the years. I know you start here with a meditation. Mm-hmm. So if you would allow me, I'd like to lead us into a short meditation. Yeah. Okay. All right. we gently begin to deepen our breath, expanding the diaphragm, drawing the breath up into the ribs and the chest, opening up a spacious heart, and then rounding our lips to the letter O and purposefully exhaling all thought and tension. With each next in-breath, opening a deeper spaciousness within. With each next out-breath, releasing active thinking, quieting the mind, allowing ourselves to sink deeper into this present, eternal moment. The songs of the birds, the vibrations of this space, the planetary reality that is with us here and now. In breath, we open spacious hearts. Out breath, we release thought and obstacles, tension, expectations, as we drop into full and quiet presence. And in the fullness of this quiet presence, let us meditate on these words. Dost thou reckon thyself only a puny form, when within thee the whole universe is folded? Dost thou reckon thyself only a puny form, when within thee the whole universe is folded? I'd like to begin today's conversation with you by asking you to take a moment in the quietness of your inner space and to reflect on the following question. What are we living? take a few moments, turn inward and listen to what's arising within you when presented with this question, what are we living? And whenever you feel moved, I invited you, a few of you, to share briefly just your sense of what it is we are living now.
Okay. Yeah. Elena, from a personal perspective, and I am constantly conscious since I've been someone who, mostly my entire life, has been exploring the soul realm and so forth, and what maybe things a lot beyond that. And so I, from a personal perspective, have a consciousness all the time of what identify as the soul, and that of my, and it's always in going back and forth with my physical presence and physical consciousness and so forth. And sometimes events like falling and breaking my arm a few weeks ago are reminders that the physical is fairly significant in the context of my life, more so than I oftentimes think of it. I don't know exactly what the question means. What are we living? But I imagine my being as Tom coached as sort of like in the movie Avatar, you know, and me at another level trying to integrate and also trying to give the best I can to this aspect of being to be its best. They may or may not be the same thing, but I'm always conscious of the two different aspects. I don't know whether that's an answer or not.
Thank you. It's a wonderful start. Thank you, Tom. I know this is a perplexing question. Maybe a little bit lower. Seems to echo a lot. Is that okay? But I'm asking it nonetheless because...
You're speaking so softly, it's...
Okay, should I raise my voice a little bit? Will that help?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do my best. I'm asking this question nonetheless because this is a question that came up for the majority of humanity when the pandemic hit and life so dramatically changed from anything that we have experienced in the past. And the question still stands. We still do not know. And so, once again, what are we living? Please feel free to share anything that comes to you. Yes?
Can we stay in our seats?
Please, yes.
First thing that came to my mind was love for other people, for your family, and for yourself.
Love, thank you, for other people, for your family, and for yourself. Thank you so much. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I think of it as a time to be with yourself, to learn about yourself. Who are you? Who are we? Because we had such a busy life, especially in the United States.
Yeah.
All we do is run around and do things, and we don't think. We don't go inside. It's forced an assessment of who I am, where I'm going, where I have been.
Beautiful, thank you.
Elena, people on Zoom can't hear the comments from the room unless people come to a microphone.
Okay, so can I ask the next one who shares to please come to the microphone, or you can be past this microphone here. Anybody else who'd like to share? What are we living? Thank you.
I sometimes feel like I'm living a dream.
Just a second, sir.
Step away
Can you
from
hear
it.
me?
Yes, now, please.
Sometimes I feel like I'm living a dream,
Hmm.
especially when so many people around me dying off and thinking, this dream ain't gonna last for long.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. So the previous friend shared, I'm just going to repeat your words, that this is a time for us to go inward. Since we are so busy in this country running around, acquiring things and doing things, this has been a time for us to discover who we are. And then there is that feeling that we're living a dream and we don't know what we're going to wake up to. Any other thoughts?
Just going to repeat what she said as well. This has been a time to share with each other a love that we have, that somehow in the quietness, the stillness, all of a sudden this love has intensified. And you want to share it with others. And you want to share, it's like a certain light. It's a light that you want to share, and that is love. With not just yourself, but with your family, with friends, and with others.
Thank you so much.
For me, two words came to mind, or to heart. One was just great uncertainty, and the other one is great opportunity. And the way I see this is we are, many of us, very perplexed about what lies ahead. I mean, we used to have maybe more illusions about what lies ahead, but now maybe we're feeling, at least I am, that we really don't know. But we also know that there are great opportunities for humanity to rise up, to be more caring for our planet and more caring for each other. And I guess that the great uncertainty is, will humanity, will we as individuals and as a human species rise up to that opportunity?
Thank you.
Tammy on Zoom says we're living in a global awakening as an apocalypse defined as an unveiling of truths.
Thank you, Tammy.
I saw it in the chats.
Yes, wonderful.
What popped in for me was love diluted by separation.
Thank you.
What occurred to me was someone said to me once, time is wasted. In other words, get on with your life. And in the months that I was alone, because I couldn't even go out and appraise houses or show houses because of COVID, I got to know myself better and said, time is wasted. Do what you want to do in life. So I go to concerts, I go to ballets, I do the things I like music, I like all those things, so I do that. And the second thing that comes to me is just say no. Remember that? Just say no. That was about drugs, that didn't work. But if you say no more often, you get to enjoy the things you want to do instead of doing what others want to do or others want you to do. Maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. Maybe you should do what you want to do.
Thank you. You know, as I think about what is the common theme, the common denominator among all the sharings that we heard today, what strikes me is that this time of COVID and forced isolation has really made many of us, I would suggest maybe the majority of us, re-examine our relationships to ourselves, our relationships to each other, our relationships to life, hopefully also our relationship to the planet. And so it has been a time of taking stock, and it still is. And that's why this question is such a difficult question. You notice it's really a perplexing question to address. That's the question that propelled me to start writing in 2020. I was literally awakened routinely at 3 a.m. in the morning with the feeling that I have to write. After decades as an educator and a clinical psychologist and doing research and giving talks, I just felt the urgency to integrate and to articulate whatever has come through me in a way that is coherent and that can help ordinary people of every walk of life really tackle the question of what are we living. Because it became very clear, and it is now even clearer than it was in 2020, that this pandemic is mutating, but we're not going to be free of viral mutations and all the complexities that they spread in the world and what they actually indicate about our relationship to the natural world. So this is not something that's going away. It is perhaps mutating until we figure things out. And so what we really have to figure out is exactly what we have been living and how that's different than what we're headed to. And so what came to me as in these 3 a.m.s, in thinking about how to put together all of my clinical, educational, interpersonal, and actually very international experience, is to describe the journey that it seems to me we are collectively on. So in this book I used the metaphor of the hero's journey of Joseph Campbell, suggesting that we have essentially left home as we know it. Even though in the whole first year of the pandemic, people kept talking about when are we going to get back to normal? When is the vaccine going to come out? Many people were saying so we can get back to normal. We know now that there's no such thing as getting back, and there's no such thing as normal. Whatever we called normal before has definitely left us, or we have left it. And so we are now acutely aware that there's some kind of new standard that is having to emerge and is emerging, in fact, through us. But we have very little language for that because our public space, our educational spaces, our shared spaces do not really provide a language. And we think very much in terms of language. We're meaning-making creatures, and we don't have the frames of reference, and ordinary people don't have the frames of reference to really think about what is emerging. And so I tried to do that. I tried to tell that story through clinical vignettes of many lives that I have had the privilege to accompany, and the changes and transformations in these lives and the discoveries of these lives. But in general, the understanding is that the understanding that permeates this book is that inner and outer, individual and collective, are interwoven into one and the same reality. It's like amoeba's strip. If you've seen amoeba strip, or you can Google one, you can see that it's seamless. You cannot tell which is inner, which is outer. So we cannot separate ourselves anymore from the physical, social, environmental, and global reality we're living. And on this planet, we now have millions of displaced people who nobody wants, who cannot find a place to call home. We also have millions of children starving. We have a climate crisis which is intensifying and which within the next decade is going to become undeniable. And we also are, each of us, as we heard here, individually awakening from our days of scurrying around, especially in North America, to produce God knows what, do more, produce more wealth, more business, more this, more that. We are awakening from that. We are starting to realize that our souls are hungry, that life is an eternal moment, and that moment has to be honored. And that's what I hear in the saying no and also asking who you are. But really, this also is related to how we define and redefine our relationships to a bigger reality. And that's where people, I find, really lack language. You could even hear today when we were trying to speak about it, how much we use the term I. I am turning inward. I am trying to discover. What about the we? How do we think of the we? Where is the we in our consciousness and what does it mean? And so leaving home, the first part of the book, is about awakening from our days and discovering step by step the aspects of our being that connect us to the we, that connect us to reality beyond ourselves as well as within ourselves. Again, this is amoeba strip. You cannot separate inner from outer. And so in this awakening, I ask the question, what understanding and what corresponding practices can stabilize our experience of living amidst such unprecedented times? That is my observation. Clinical psychologists and psychotherapists are completely overwhelmed at this time. We're getting more phone calls than ever before because the rate of anxiety and depression are intensely soaring because people really do not understand what we're living and what we're supposed to do and where's our place in this chaos that appears to be reality right now, intensifying chaos. And so clearly these are unprecedented times, and we know that these are times of tremendous global transformation, of spiritual emergency. These are times that have been described in prophecies, as was indicated by Tammy, as apocalyptic times. The intensity of the turbulence and the intensity of the transformation is so great that it feels apocalyptic. It feels that everything as we know it, as we've known it, is collapsing very quickly. It's becoming untenable. It's losing its credibility. If you ask an average person, what do you have faith now? What do you find credible? People find it very difficult to answer because just about everything that used to seem credible does not anymore. And so what is the understanding and what are the practices that can stabilize our experience of living in these unprecedented times? The first thing I suggest is the importance of understanding that there's no going back to the past. There's no going back to what we call normal. That this is, in fact, what we are all jolted into by this pandemic is a very perilous journey ahead. It is a perilous journey in which we have to awaken from our limited identities, from our limited self-definitions, and we are forced to open ourselves to the uncertainty that Earl spoke about. It is a massive uncertainty, and in this uncertainty, whatever is going to emerge as our sense of who we are and what we are is going to be a whole new level of reality. And so, opening ourselves beyond our limited identities and self-definitions calls for intense self-examination. And so in the first chapter of this book, I describe stories of how people learn to listen inward, to deep listen, to in fact pursue this intense self-examination that opens spaciousness for us to hear intimations of a broader reality within ourselves. Remember, you meditated on the line. dost thou think thyself only a puny form, when within thee the whole universe is folded? And if we continue this examination and ask ourselves, how do I actually operate in my daily life? Do I operate as this puny form that has to position itself here and there? Or do I find myself more and more feeling the infinite love, light, and joy within me that is spilling out all around me, and generosity? And just asking these questions. This is a time for asking these questions. And as we are asking these questions, we also realize that we are on an evolutionary journey. Of course, as a developmental psychologist, I'm always biased towards thinking about what is the evolutionary trajectory here. But there's no doubt that we are individually and collectively on a very intense evolutionary trajectory. And I could have done a PowerPoint today with the many charts that are in this book, but I chose not to, because the charts are in the book, and you can pursue the logic of these charts a little more diligently when you actually do the reading. But today I thought it was better to actually look into your faces and have a conversation than to go through the charts. But if you look at the developmental chart in chapter 2, there's quite a few of them actually, we see this helix, this double helix of self-formation is the first part of this helix, and it contains a number of stages, and the second part of the helix is self-transcendence. And it seems now that we are propelled towards this borderline point between the first and the second part of the helix, steeply completing a process of ego formation and self-development, and beginning to get the intimations of self-transcendence. And self-transcendence is the movement towards the we, the movement towards understanding our deepest reality. And our deepest reality is something that was, over the centuries, from the dawn of human civilization, referred to as our foundational oneness. But since the middle of the 19th century, this understanding was brought forth in the social realm, both in the East and in the West. In the East, this was the emergence of the Baha'i spiritual paradigm, which is a powerful and largely unknown integrated spiritual paradigm that grasps the history of religious revelations and spiritual revelations and wisdom traditions as an essential unitary evolutionary process that is actually pointing us towards this oneness. And the premise of this 19th century understanding is that we have now evolved, talk about the dual helix, remember? We have now evolved to such a point individually and collectively that we are able to awaken massively to the oneness. Though our oneness seemed to be in the past accessible only to a handful of a spiritual elite around the planet, people who could meditate on these things, people who had access to this understanding. But at this time now, and the pandemic brought it home in the most concrete ways, we're all realizing how interdependent we are. We have supply chains that broke throughout the planet. We're still feeling, we still walk into CVS and they're empty shelves, and people still wait from 3 to 6 months for a piece of furniture that they've ordered because the supply chain is so broken. And so that is telling us in very concrete ways that we are profoundly interdependent and interwoven together, and that our ways of operating, our ways of organizing our physical and social life don't actually correspond to that reality. And that's why during the pandemic we did not have a coherent global response. We had a patchwork of all kinds of different things. It still goes on as a patchwork. And in terms of the ramifications and the fallout from the pandemic, it's also a patchwork response. There's really no coherent collective vision that corresponds to the level of our interdependence. And so another thing that we are also living as we are awakening, we are on this very perilous journey to having to rethink our ways of being with each other in society and on this planet, and radically transforming it. So you cannot now separate our personal transformation from the transformation of the forms of governance and distribution and use of resources on this planet that is having to happen. And as climate scientists are telling us now, it has to happen in the next decade, because afterwards the course of climate change is no longer reversible. And so these are profound processes. In order to move from this individual growth towards self-transcendence to the collective, there are a lot of steps and realizations that are involved, and I've tried to the best of my understanding to describe them in this book. One of these is we have to learn to regulate our minds. We have, for the longest time in human history, taken our minds for granted. We don't understand yet what it means to regulate our minds, how our minds relate to consciousness, what is the relationship between mind and consciousness, how are we choosers and agents in this process of relating to our minds, relating to consciousness. These are things that I explore in chapter 3. And then there is the bigger question, the even bigger question of what is the role of heart in the evolution of mind? How do we understand heart as the most potent energy field in the human system, at least 1,000 to 10,000 times stronger than the field of the brain? How do we understand the brain-heart coherence that both IONS and the Heart Math Institute are doing so much work on? How does that manifest in our day-to-day, moment-to-moment lives? What does it mean to live with brain-heart coherence? Or as I prefer to think about it, as a heart-mind epistemology and consciousness. What does that mean? And how is that different than the way we've been living? These are the hard questions. These are the hard, self-reflective questions. The way this book is organized, for each chapter at the end, there is an appendix with reflective questions and little excerpts to meditate on, which hopefully prompt the pursuing of these difficult questions for ourselves, because now is not a time when we can wait for a global elite of any kind, political, social, philosophical, or any other, to resolve the issues that we're facing. It is really now the coming of age of humanity as of mid-19th century, as it was prophesied, is the time for all of us collectively to resolve these questions. And how can that be? Of course, and that's the first part of the book, our deep self-examination in terms of our developmental trajectory, in terms of the use of mind, the place of heart in our epistemological functioning. All of these are very important questions. But beyond that, we are having to realize that civilization has evolved through a sequence of collective centers of understanding, of knowledge, of governance. Can you think of some collective centers that we have recognized and leaned on in the past? Can you just throw out one or two examples, just one-word examples? Church is has been a collective center. Thank you. Yes, church. Any other examples? Democracy. Okay, or democratic governance. Okay, that's a collective center. Okay.
The internet.
The internet is a new collective center. I would say education has been a collective center. Okay, and we can keep thinking, but when you look at it carefully now, you realize that all of these collective centers no longer hold. Their credibility has been so seriously examined in our growth and development in past centuries that we now know all of them are subject to reconstructing. And I guess the bigger and the more scary question is, are we going to reconstruct them, or are new collective centers actually emerging? And I'm here to say, and I actually discussed that in the second and third part of the book, that it is my observation that radically new collective centers are emerging. These are grassroots collective centers through which people are trying to develop new forms of governance. If you'd like to make a contribution, there is a request. You're welcome to do so, but there is a request to use the microphone. Okay. It's perfectly all right to interrupt and join. Just come on over to the microphone so the people on the Zoom. Okay. All right. Okay. So these collective centers, I will say, are communities of a new kind, self-organizing communities that are trying to find a new way to self-govern, to address issues of personal and global significance, and also are trying to develop a new language, a language that is, I would say, evolutionary in nature. And so the second part of the book is dedicated to this very difficult, very perilous journey of, in fact, discovering an evolutionary language that speaks to this radically new reality that we're living and to the radically new challenges that this reality is presenting to us. We can see that the climate science has existed, at least for the last 20 years, very, very clear. They have been how many global summits? You can tell me during these past 20 years. Have we seen a radical shift in policies? No. What is that telling us? The knowledge is there, the summits have happened, but the will of the existing collective centers is not there. It cannot carry the movement forward. So what does that mean for all of us? When it heats up, it's going to heat up for all of us. When we're flooded, we're all flooded. So that means that we are having to connect to each other and to really think and consult together on new ways of doing business, and business we do through language, and so it's also language that has to change. And so in the second part of the book, in chapter 5, I explore one particular journey of becoming whole and the transformation towards wholeness of a woman who I had the privilege to accompany, and she's referred to as Sarah in the book. And she literally became a new creation as she began to be exposed to an evolutionary language that uniquely spoke to her in a different way than anything she had ever been spoken to. And it also provided her with a whole new vision. And so I want to say first that when we turn to listen inward, one of the first things we hear is our suppressed vulnerability. And perhaps that is why it is so scary to listen inward, because who wants to really feel our suppressed vulnerability? But in the world now, there is a massive movement towards what people now, colleagues of mine, are now calling becoming a trauma-informed global society. In other words, the recognition of how fragile our human reality is, mind, spirit, in a very fragile body and in a very difficult social context, oftentimes not a benevolent social context. So the fragility of the human experience, the fact that the majority of us have grown up with some kind of traumatization or other, relative to our circumstances, and that we cannot just wait for one at a time for all of us to gain access to therapy and heal ourselves for the world to become a saner place. There's just not the time. Climate is not working in this timeline. Apparently, our healing is becoming trauma-informed, embracing our vulnerability, opening ourselves to our vulnerability. And as we open ourselves to our vulnerability, we recognize collective as well as individual pathways that heal us. And before I go to Sarah, I want to mention a few more aspects of that, and then Sarah is a great example of all of this. Philosopher of religion and remarkable anthropologist, whom I deeply admire, Houston Smith, in his final book, Forgotten Truth, described the human predicament in the following way. Ever since man appeared on this planet, he seems to have been searching for an object that he could love, serve, and adore wholeheartedly. An object which, being of the highest and most permanent beauty and perfection, would never permit his love to dwindle, deteriorate, or suffer frustration. The search has led to many difficulties, yet he persists. The entire history of the race, political, moral, legal, socio-cultural, intellectual, economic, and religious, from earliest times to the present day, is a record of man's search for a beckoning object. Why am I sharing this now? Because even before he passed, Houston Smith made the observation that something has gone fundamentally wrong in our social reality, because our love, our ability to love, serve, and adore has profoundly dwindled. It has dwindled into very concrete objects and aspirations, very fundamentally materialistic. We have been so disillusioned by ideals that we just don't trust ideals very much anymore. And so this is a difficult time. And he says that this time has literally hit at the very core of being human. He wrote this at the turn of the century before he passed. And so now, as we are acknowledging our vulnerability, we also have to acknowledge that it's hard to trust anything. That's part of our vulnerability. And that was part of Sarah's predicament when she came to my office. It was impossible to trust anything, and she's not the exception. So we search, and our search goes through countless attachments, but at the end of the day, it is about finding a language that unlocks the barriers. And so when I spoke about this developmental journey at the end of the second chapter, I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but I'm trying to give you a taste of the whole. I described it also through the mystical 4 valleys of the human search, which was a mystical piece revealed by Baha'u'llah in the mid-19th century in response to some Sufi philosophers who came to dialogue with him. And he describes the search and the evolution, our individual and our collective evolution, as the movement into the awakening into the valley of search, which is what we've been talking about until now. And of course, the valley of search is a valley of a lot of heartache and a lot of doubt. But this conscious search eventually leads us to the valley of reason, which is the second valley, the second tier of development. And the valley of reason is really often propelled by suffering. It is suffering that allows us to begin to see more clearly the reality of things versus the illusions and the myths that we have created, both personal and collective social myths. And it is in the valley of reason that we subject ourselves, our lives, and social reality to profound moral and spiritual examination of life purpose. And this is where we begin to grow in discernment. We begin to see the difference between principles, spiritual and moral principles that hold, and the myths that surround us. And the movement from this realm of higher reason is into the realm of love. And of course, the realm of love is something many of you spoke about. It is the realm of really realizing the oneness and expressing the oneness. And then the actual integration is the valley of self, reason, and love. And this integration of in the movement towards the valley of self, reason, and love does not happen on our own. It happens in the process of creating collective centers, in the process of creating communities, in the process of trying together to organize to serve the planet. And that's why the story of Sarah is so poignant. When she came to me, Sarah was in her 40s. She was very skeptical. She was referred to me because she was dealing with stage 4 cancer. And she had a life history of severe abuse in which she grew up, loss of her mother at an early age. Her father was a war veteran with all kinds of unresolved issues. And so there was violence, there was anger, there was abandonment. And so she was completely closed in. Her question to me was, why should I trust? Why should I trust? What is there to trust? Hers was a more extreme case of what I see to be very much the condition of ordinary people. And so the journey that she began, the healing journey that she began, was accompanied by exposure to various readings, spiritual sources, Thich Nhat Hanh, and various other sources, including some of the hidden words of Baha'u'llah, which she found to really resonate with her way of being. And I'll just share with you one that was her favorite. Burst thy cage asunder, O Son of Spirit, and even as the phoenix of love, soar into the firmament of holiness. Renounce thyself, and filled with the spirit of mercy, abide in the realm of celestial sanctity. It was the first time that she was hearing that there is a realm beyond her cage, a realm of light, a realm of being. And as she began to expose herself to a spiritual evolutionary language from this and a number of other sources, as I mentioned already, she began to realize that she was not this finite creature that had to defend and protect and couldn't really trust, that she was this infinite inner reality, and that her vulnerability made her strong. And so she could open the boundaries and really burst the cage. What she began to discover through this evolutionary language is that it redefined her drawbacks, her suffering, her losses as evolutionary leaps. The language itself redefined it as evolutionary leaps. It started to show her that humanity is on this tremendous evolutionary helix right now. We are struggling to come out of the valley of self, through the valley of reason and love, and into the valley of unity, which is the mature consciousness, individual and collective consciousness. That's a very painstaking process, and in this process, obviously, there's going to be tremendous betrayals and tremendous losses and tremendous casualties, but it is a powerful evolutionary process, and one need not be scared. And to Sarah's amazement, she discovered gradually a life free of fear. And she began to see that, and she was particularly exposed to the society building processes within the worldwide Baha'i community, because that's something she really connected to. And what she saw is these communities were actually building governance of a new kind from the grassroots, quite quietly, below the radar, without any big claims being made, but in every community, through processes of collective consultation and collective spiritual bodies that would be democratically elected each year anonymously. They would be making decisions about how to manage their limited often resources, how to resolve community issues, how to improve on governments, how to distribute resources, how to address education, and clearly a whole different society building process than anything she was ever exposed to. And of course, as Tom mentioned in the flyer, at the time when this understanding, this evolutionary collective understanding was first released in the mid-19th century in the Middle East, it was simultaneously emergent in the West in the form of New Thought, and of course it was the same understanding, unitive understanding. But from the middle of the 19th century, when unitive understanding and unitive processes of healing were first intuited, revealed, and people started to more concertedly try to act on them, till now, almost 2 centuries later, a little under 2 centuries later, there is a radical leap. Now we're having to collectively do it. Here and there, you were spotty communities and organizations, unity churches, Unitarian churches, Baha'i grassroots communities, other initiatives, ION initiatives. But now we are having to really scale the response, the unitive healing response. And that's what Sarah discovered in her life. The unitive healing response was scaled in her own life. There was transformations in her from a partitioned identity to a sense of much broader fellowship. That was the first transformation. Another one was from her private inertia, well-protected life with its routine and certain inertia, to a vision of meaningful social contribution. She began to see that she has a place in this global historical process, and that she has a choice of how to be an agent in this process. And that was very liberating and empowering for her. And these are things, of course, she's still processing and still learning about, but it was really where there was a wall before a door burst open. And also her motivation shifted. Sarah was a very practical woman, a New Englander who had learned survival to the T. She was all about the practicality of survival. And she had a very mundane, practical New England motivation about getting a job done and getting this done and getting that done. And what happened for her is her motivation began to transform. It became more elevated. It became more informed and purified by a vision of what's possible, a vision of a movement into the realm of spiritual consciousness, which isn't about getting a job done in the backyard, but it manifests relationally. And of course, she began to see that transformation has to be collaborative. So her survival as an individualist was no longer feasible. And so in chapter 6, I try to describe what I call the new spiritual alphabet that is emerging. And this alphabet is an alphabet of spiritual principles. These are spiritual principles that I particularly draw from this phenomenal Baha'i paradigm that emerged, and that's not really well known yet. But if you look at these principles, you will see that you can also identify them in Native American wisdom traditions. You can identify them in previous other wisdom traditions. You can definitely identify them in the nature of the ION's work today. These are universal spiritual principles. Each principle is like a letter of the alphabet. How we apply these principles, each of us is creating an evolutionary language for this new age through our actions. So this is just not the words I'm going to use. This is how I'm living out of these universal spiritual principles in such a way that I'm literally co-creating along with my fellow human beings the evolutionary language that is going to deliver us into a global governance, regenerative governance of this planet. Not that life is finite and limited to this planet. We know from what Tom has shared with you and what many other speakers here have shared that the spiritual realm is infinite. and the levels and frequencies of reality and evolution are infinite. But while we're here on this planet, we are this configuration, mind, soul, in a very fragile body, in a very difficult social context, on a fragile planet. And that is our schooling. And that's what we have to work with here while we're here. And whether we do or don't and how much we do has a lot to do with our spiritual evolution towards further realms of consciousness and reality. And so I will come back to the concept of evolutionary language, which is the language we co-create as we work together to create collective centers of a new kind that are moving us towards regenerative governance of this planet. So this is a very profound reality. So if you now come to think about your daily life in this way, it's a game changer, at least in my view. And certainly in the lives that I have accompanied who have been able to come to such an understanding, it is a profound game changer. Nothing is just a random activity. Nothing is just going through the motions. Nothing is just so. And it's not only metaphysically significant. It is socially significant. It is environmentally significant. It is relationally significant. And I am the agent. I am co-creating with fellow humans. There is a danger in this process, which I've also experienced quite a bit in being exposed to various environments. There is a danger of skipping too lightly into a pious spiritual language without really substantiating that with the kind of planetary collective agents action towards creating new collective centers that corresponds to this talk. We cannot just dwell in the realm of the metaphysical because we are here social and planetary creatures. And we are also responsible for this web of life, which we have so dramatically affected, impacted. And so the trap, and of course Ken Wilber speaks a lot about this spirituality trap. It's an ego trap. And I'm sure you're familiar with what he has to say about it. But it is really a trap of preaching to the choir, gathering in clubs where we preach to each other. We know we generally see things similarly, and so it's a good feeling. We got our little tribe. Nothing wrong with that. But the question is, what else is happening? What else is happening? Because language is not just the words we throw around amongst each other. Remember, language is co-created by our actions in alignment with the alphabet of spiritual principles in the context of society and the planet. That is the language. That's not the words we throw around. So to remember that and to ask ourselves the hard question again and again, how to act out of that is both, as Earl was saying earlier, an enormous challenge right now because there's just so much uncertainty, but it's also an enormous opportunity. It's an exciting time to live. And if we could talk this way to our adult children and grandchildren, I'm guessing they're not going to be as buried in their iPhones as they currently are. For those of you who like to read blogs, I started to blog on Medium, and you can find me on Elena-Mustakova at medium.com. And my most recent blog of this past Tuesday, I publish every Tuesday, was What Are We Living? Which is the question I asked you. And it starts with a picture of young adults in, of course, ripped jeans and phones. Mm-hmm. And you know, they are searching. They are searching. But we don't have a language, a frame of reference that makes sense to them. And they're very astutely attuned to the fact that much of what we say does not hold. And so they just kind of bury themselves there. So anyways, you may want to read, and I'm always welcoming engagement in the blog, responses, your thoughts. I would really love to hear from as many of you as possible. And you can subscribe to receive the weekly Tuesday nights. So the litmus test of whether we really are creating a co-creating an evolutionary language for the regeneration of this planet, or we're just exercising in talking, is to what extent are we developing patterns of community life guided by spiritual principles? Again, the litmus test is to what extent are we creating patterns of community life guided by spiritual principles? That is, in my mind, the challenge, and to that challenge is dedicated the third part of the book, which takes us from the individual all the way into the collective co-creation, which is really the laboratory of the individual. So the chapter 7 is dedicated to this process in the United States on the level of a nation. What does it mean to really radically rethink what's happening in this country and radically engage it in a different way? And chapter 8 looks at what is happening globally and what our potential place can be globally. But in terms of the litmus test, which I just mentioned, I wanted to read to you one quote about what it means to develop patterns of community life guided by spiritual principles. There are spiritual principles, or what some call human values, by which solutions can be found for every social problem. Any well-intended group can, in a general sense, devise practical solutions to its problems, but good intentions and practical knowledge are usually not enough. Now that's very interesting. Good intentions and practical knowledge are usually not enough. The essential merit of spiritual principles is that it not only presents a perspective which harmonizes with that which is immanent in human nature, the soul, it also induces an attitude, a dynamic, a will, and aspiration, which facilitates the discovery and implementation of practical measures. I'm going to read this last sentence again because it's just so profound. So we said good intentions and practical knowledge are just not enough. The essential merit of spiritual principle is that it not only presents a perspective which harmonizes with that which is immanent in human nature, it also induces an attitude, a dynamic, a will, and aspiration, which facilitates the discovery and implementation of practical measures. Now, new time requires new practical measures. This condition in the planet has never been before, and it obviously cannot be addressed with the measures we know until now. We need to be very co-creating. And so that's where spiritual principles, and my chapter 6 is dedicated to a list of the alphabet of spiritual principles as I understand them. Obviously, that's my interpretation. It'll be interesting if you choose to read that and engage it, to write back and let me know what you think about this alphabet and how you would modify it, because that's an emergent process. So I'd like to close this part of the talk so that we can have time for discussion with a very short segment from the end of the book that will give you a taste of what I think we are living. All right, so I'll close with this reading. Unity is a condition of the human spirit, cultivated in the context of working to build diverse and unified communities. What if we were to recognize the common ground that we share and begin to organize ourselves on every level, from localities to nations, to come together, purify, and unite our intent, and consult on concrete processes to advance this intent into actions and policies? What if we were to honestly admit that the purity and honesty of our intent needs constant renewal and strengthening? What if we regularly gathered, I'm skipping a little bit, across social demarcations to engage in reflective, meditative, prayerful, and joyful practices that elevate and strengthen our spirits, mind you, across social demarcations? Awaken our conscience, clarify our intent, build fellowship, open space to consult and act together. And then I go on to say, of course, we all feel rather inadequate in these efforts, sort of like the ugly duckling, but we forget that it is the quality of the spirit that is our swan-like nature within. And this swan-like nature is only released as we act in these ways. And so I close with this following little brief vignette. A 10-year-old emerging swan of a boy recently observed to his mother, "Mom, the world is upside down. It's not even sideways." My client, his mother, paused, took a deep breath, and responded, "It's okay, son. Babies are born upside down. It is the right position for emerging into a new reality." And I close with the following quote: "So powerful is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth." But it's not kumbaya land, it's hard work. Thank you, friends.
Elena, there was a request on the chat for a link to your book.
That is a very fair request. What I'm going to do is, as soon as I get back and get to my computer, I will send the link. It is on Amazon. If you go on Amazon, you actually could pull it up now if anybody chose to use their device and go to Amazon and type Global Unitive Healing Mustakova, it comes up. You will see there's quite a few very strong reviews. And what's most fascinating is there's a videotape. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a video of what Claudia Wells, the IONS chairperson, had to say at the launching of the book. She spoke for about 10 minutes beautifully. She's such an inspired soul, and she really spoke beautifully. So if you go to Amazon and type in Global Unitive Healing Mustakova, the book comes up. There's quite a few reviews, and there's the video of Claudia Wells. And if there's some of you that want to purchase the book, I ended up with 4 copies at home, so if anybody wants, you're welcome to come and get yourself a copy, and of course I'll be happy to sign it. So thoughts, questions, comments, please, friends, the space is yours now, please. No rush.
Now, anyone online who wants to ask a question, just either use your electronic hand and put it up, or just show me in some way that you want to ask a question.
All right, please.
Hi, my name is Martha.
Martha, hi.
I'm a trauma therapist, and enrichment. One of the things that has become increasingly apparent to me in Earth School, as I'm fond of calling this place, is the importance of integrating darkness and light, and evil and good, which is enormously challenging for some people, particularly if they've been traumatized. So I often tell a story about Jeffrey Dahmer, who, when he was about, I think, 18 months old, had to go to the hospital for 3 weeks. And back then, they didn't know about attachment. And so they told his parents, "Go home, he'll be fine, we've got this." And so he went from being this happy, bubbly baby to this, very pushing away, whiny, cryy, rigid when they tried to hold him. So his mom, when he came back from the hospital, his mom noticed that, well, he seems happier if we put him in the corner and just leave him alone, which of course reinforced the attachment disorder. So he has reactive attachment disorder, and then it just continued. And so he graduated, of course, from torturing small animals as a middle schooler to killing people. And when the forensic psychiatrists in the prison interviewed him, as they often do, just to understand more what's going on in his mind, he said, "The only time I ever felt any emotion whatsoever was when I was hurting someone else." So you can imagine going through life not ever feeling anything unless you're hurting someone. So, and of course there's no excuse for that behavior, and we imprison people like that because that's the appropriate thing to do. But if you can understand why he did what he did, you can have just, I think, a glimpse of understanding and even maybe possibly compassion for him, because he was in this prison of isolation where there was no stimulation at all for him because of neurological damage. And the only way that he could experience any sensation whatsoever was through pain. Does that excuse his behavior? Of course not. And like I said, we imprison people like that. But it helps you understand, because I think it speaks to what you were talking about how people reach out for the numinous and they look for that shiny object. What is it that pushes us forward towards the unity? And so I just thought I would mention that because it seems to help people who are very traumatized at least understand just a glimmer of how important it is to integrate darkness and light. So,
thank you so much. Thank you. That's certainly a very, very compelling and extreme example of what it's like when we get into the practice of numbing the heart. Now, this child had the misfortune that he was only raised by a nuclear family. And if the nuclear family drew the conclusions that they drew, or the mother did, there was not a community holding the nuclear family to notice, this just can't be, wait a minute, there's got to be some way here to keep engaging and keep loving and keep surrounding. But in the modern world that we've devised, nuclear families are on their own, and the mother was doing the best she could with what she understood, of course. And that involved numbing. Now, how many people do we see in our offices every day who exhibit degrees, maybe not to that extent of numbing, but certainly very normalized degrees of numbing the emotions so that you can work those 15-hour days, so that you can compete, so that you can really get ahead of the others around you, so that you are not too perturbed when you come home exhausted and your spouse is not happy because you're not present. I mean, the numbing on every level is extraordinary. I remember when my mother, the few times that I could convince her to come and stay with me some months in the US, she was suffering. She would say, I don't understand it. It's such beautiful landscape. It's such beautiful homes. Nobody is sitting in front of their front yards. I don't see anybody on the porches, in the yards, on the streets. People pass and they'll just be very impersonal with this little "how are you?" If that. She said, it's very lonely here. Why do you live this way? Why do people have these beautiful manicured lawns and there's nobody on them? And the blinds are closed. What is this? Well, it's a country that numbs because it works very hard. It has to produce. It's racing. It takes new immigrants and throws them into the melting pot and says, okay, you got a chance. Prove yourself. Accomplish. And so numbing has been our way, and we have exported that along with our material and consumer standard, globalized it. And it's more and more a reality in other parts of the world. But that is the process of the dying of the old world. We are increasingly aware of the damage of this kind of numbing, and people are reacting to it in all kinds of ways. And then there are communities of action that are awakening to the need to start feeling again, to feel our vulnerability, to feel our insecurity, to feel the fact that we're scared, that we're disoriented, that we're uncertain, that we don't see the path forward yet, and to support and collaborate with each other in this process. And that's the process of global healing. That is the new world that is emergent. And it is phenomenal if we understand it. What are the young people doing when they're doing this all day? Is that not a form of numbing? Of course, same thing. You know, you go into restaurants, couples, nicely dressed, beautiful restaurants, sitting across from each other, doing this. This is the hardest form of despair and suffering that we're living. It's pretty massive, but out of it also is being born a different way of being. And we have to talk about it. Not just therapists, everybody has to talk about it now because we can understand it. That's the whole point. Books like this are intended for that. There's many like this. This is just what I could do. But there's lots out there that helps us develop the language to speak about these realities, to engage these realities, to dialogue with these realities, and not just to observe them and carry on, but to transform. So, sorry that I went on a tangent here. Thank you.
I wanted you to talk a little more about this new language. Maybe many of us are my age, and I've got a granddaughter who was home from college and used a word I didn't know. And she said, "We're making up words all the time at school." So maybe this is where the new language is beginning, but how do we connect with them if they're evolving faster than we are?
You know, I'm so glad you asked this question. Thank you. Definitely, I know that young people are making up new words all the time, and the text messages are unreadable for us because they actually use a vocabulary that we don't know. But I also know adult groups that are in the business of creating new words. I was talking to a colleague, retired psychiatrist, the other day, who has registered this new form of education, which he calls Genie Seminars. And he has coined the word the genie organ for the cerebral cortex, because he thinks that if we think about it as the genie organ, we emphasize more its ability to envision new and creative solutions, like the genie out of the box. And so he's trying to use, so for example, instead of human being, he will use the term humane becoming. Not bad. Not bad. So there is the coining of new language, some of it in a reaction to things that you adults are saying just don't make sense. Why don't we just play around? Maybe we'll hit something that actually makes sense. That's part of what's happening in the young circles. There's also thinkers and professionals who are thinking systematically about terminology that works better. In my approach here, when I speak about a new language, I don't mean new words. And that does not exclude the possibility of using terms such as a humane becoming instead of a human being. I find that one to be pretty good, actually, because it really gives us the direction we need to orient ourselves to. But in the way that I think about the evolutionary languages, I think about spiritual principles that orient how we talk to young people. And so I break it down to skills here, so you'll have to see for yourself. But a spiritual principle, for example, is the unitive view of reality, beyond the disunity of material and spiritual. So I talk, we have young adults, that children and actually grandchildren as well, but we talk a lot about the unitary nature of reality. It's a principle. It's not just what you see and what you can use. In every act, there is an embodiment of a spiritual energy. Every act has a spiritual significance as well as a material impact. And you have to think and be aware of that. And you have to really awaken to that fact. So that's a spiritual principle. When you start to act out of the spiritual principle that spiritual and material reality are completely intertwined, and you can just focus on the material aspects of it, that is a game changer in terms of how you think, how you speak, how you act. Another spiritual principle is the unitive view of all historic religions. That it really is moving us beyond religious disunity into understanding the progressive evolutionary revelation of spiritual understanding that is unitary in nature, but it's also evolutionary, and that we can in that way begin to form bonds of fellowship with people who connect to different traditions, but through these different traditions are keying into the evolutionary spirituality, which every tradition speaks to in one way or another. Another spiritual principle, and they're all unitive principles, you'll notice, is the unitive view of human socio-historical evolution. The fact that each age historically is an evolutionary age, and this age is the age of coming of age, developing mature consciousness. And so when we are not going back, sometimes I talk to Native American friends and they say, well, we Native Americans knew all of that. We knew that many centuries ago. And I want to say, in your wisdom teachings, the knowledge was embedded. In your social and family practices, some of that knowledge was beautifully captured. Does that mean that all of you then had that level of understanding and consciousness? It's hard for me to buy that. It is an evolutionary process. It's not about going backwards and rediscovering. It is about honoring that earlier knowledge and seeing how it is woven into the new that is emerging, because it's a new stage evolutionarily. So these are ways, they sound like very abstract principles, but we have a 22-year-old, that's our youngest, and she was pretty much raised with this language, and I hear her now, and she's just a philosopher. At 22, she just blows my mind away. I always consult her. She was the first person who read the very rough draft of this book, gave me the most discerning feedback to this point, really forced the deepest revisions, and even as everything was completed, she read through it after it was published, and again gave me feedback. Here's what's missing, here's the questions, here's this, here's that. And you know, when you engage, and these new generations, they're so sharp, they're so astute, they're so attuned. Just give them the working principles and watch what they're going to do with it. And so I'm not going to go on. There's quite a few more principles, and each of them is introduced with vignettes of lives, but that's just a way to address.
Elena, one thing that comes to mind listening to you talk, there was a wonderful book about 15 years ago, as I recall. It was called Whatever It Takes. It was a book about the cultural and educational divide, basically between the haves and the have-nots in the United States, and I'm sure it applies in many other places as well. And what was found in the studies that were illuminated in that book was that in culturally enriched households, children get read to sometimes from the womb forward on a regular daily basis, whereas in other households, the culturally deprived households, they don't get read to at all. That in culturally enriched households, children from infancy, that 85% roughly of the verbal interaction, first of all, there's a great deal more verbal interaction between parents and adults and children than there is in culturally deprived households. 85% of the verbal interaction is positive. In culturally deprived households, there's much less interaction, and 85% of it is negative.
It's controlling, yeah.
Right. And so there's nothing, even kids that are put in Head Start programs and stuff like that, by the time kids get to be 3 years old, they've already lost out on a big window of opportunity. And what your book brings out, I think, well, is the need for community in deeper and broader ways than are being expressed in this country.
Yes, exactly.
And everywhere, really.
Exactly.
Right.
And really that is the healing approach that I see emerging throughout the planet. The creation of communities that are both spiritual communities, but they're also very practical communities.
Right.
So, and these communities are united by spiritual principles. They may not call themselves by the same spiritual label,
Right.
but they recognize the same spiritual principles, consult based on these spiritual principles on what solutions to develop for the community. Could be environmental solutions, definitely the education of children. So in these communities that I have observations of all over the world, they have groups for children from the youngest ages and every age. And those are groups where they actually read, adapted to them, spiritual sources and reflect and discuss on how that applies to their lives. It's phenomenal.
Right.
But can you imagine 5-year-olds at their level of understanding?
Right. Right.
And so whatever the family was not able to give, the community environment provides, I don't want to say an equalizer, because it's not necessarily an equalizer, but it's a fertile soil for
Right.
everybody, fertile soil for everybody. And I know that I see it because these communities arise in the darkest parts of the most poverty-stricken parts of Africa, far Asia, on the islands, in all of the places that are forgotten by Western civilization. These communities are thriving communities. They create wells, they create schools, they absolutely empower their women, and they reach the spiritual principle of the equality of the masculine and the feminine through consultation. And they decide that their communities will actually thrive if they give their women the power to make decisions. So it's just amazing. And then you're not left with this cultural divide in a very individualistic society where it's all down to what the nuclear family can or cannot provide.
Right.
It's a whole different solution.
Right.
So I'm glad you brought that up. It was, even though I work on an individual level with people, my thinking is always on the collective level, because I'm very clear that
And your book is directed to both.
at both, yes. Because I know, as any therapist knows, that we just can't do enough on the individual level. At the end of the day, people walk out of our offices and they walk into a collective environment.
Right.
And it is these collective environments that have everything to do at the end of the day with whether people are going to heal and thrive or not, no matter how fine the work we do. So I'm very conscious that the two have to go together while we're here. In the beyond, how wonderful it's going to be, I don't know, but I imagine it is. But here, it's the hard work of weaving inner and outer, this Neba strip in our lives, and asking ourselves, what is the new collective center that I am co-creating with people around me? What is it dedicated to? How is it changing social reality? Where do I want to focus and emphasize more, perhaps? These are wonderful questions to take away. I hope you will take away these questions, because collective centers are of every level. It could be a neighborhood. It could be this neighborhood here, around the corner. People may not want to go to church. Many people don't. Okay? They may not want to be preached at. But as we read in the quote, the nature of spiritual principles is such the advantage that they speak to core human nature. And they call out that shiny object that we all aspire for, that you put it so well. And the Houston Smith says, we're always searching for something that we can love, serve, and adore. Even the most deprived child, when they are viewed with the eyes of the Spirit, now that's striking, and I've seen that happen. When you approach a really deprived child and view them with the eye of the Spirit as a soul that is not a puny form, already disadvantaged, but a universe is folded within. When you approach them that way, they come alive. And in my earlier work, I was actually trying to describe that, how we can actually develop through leaps and bounds when our core motivation is tapped. So you tap into the spiritual aspiration and reality of a deprived child and watch them grow by leaps and bounds. A lot of things are possible. It's not all linear, but it is communal and it is spiritual.
Right.
So thank you for bringing that contrast.
Yeah, because many of our societal ills, and ultimately our ills, even including things like climate change,
Yeah.
Are based on our lack of cohesive community.
Yeah, on selfishness,
Yeah.
on fundamental selfishness. That's what climate scientists are saying. Somebody in a blog, a fellow blogger on Medium, we read each other's and respond. I was reading his, and he was quoting a climate scientist. For those of you who connect with me, I'll refer you to that quote. It was excellent. I don't remember the name of the climate scientist, but he said, our greatest danger, as a climate scientist, he said, I used to think that our greatest danger right now is pollution, loss of diversity, and of course, climate change. And he says, I've come to realize our greatest danger is not that. Our greatest danger is selfishness. It is the core of everything that's happening.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? Please.
Perhaps this is a personal question, I guess.
Please.
When you said you were moving to Spain, my first thought was, of course, I know there's a lot of things wrong with this country. And
Right.
I can see why you'd want to be leaving here.
Right.
But why picking Spain? Is this a new fertile ground for spreading your thoughts, or what?
You know, on a very personal level, I will admit that I am exhausted and burned out and feel the need to take care of myself a little bit, because in the last 30 years, because of the understanding that I shared, I think I've done, in addition to my regular clinical work, which is extremely demanding, the research, the writing, the talking, my pro bono work has pretty much doubled my workload, and that's over a long time, so I'm pretty burned out. So one is a very basic self-care reason, and also the desire to be closer to our daughter who's in England now. And definitely ready to take a break from the rising insanity that I see. It's really disturbing. I mean, I will continue to work with it and for the causes from a distance, and will be coming back periodically every year. So my commitments here remain. I have lots of commitments here, but I also need to create a little distance for myself and do a little bit of recharging because I'm really burnt out. And then the other thing that really attracted me to Spain in particular, rather than any other part in Europe, is I love the way Andalusians intuitively know how much we need each other. They are so friendly, but not in a superficial way, in a warm-hearted way. It really is just heart, a lot of heart, and that's refreshing for me. I've suffered. I'm a Slav, and Slav culture is also very heart-based, and I've been telling my husband here, I'm starving. It's hard. For me, it's extra hard here. And I know many people don't adapt well. I mean, they have to, we adapt because we have to adapt, but we don't thrive. And I think it's time for me to thrive a little more, work a little less, connect with a culture that has a lot of heart to it, thank you, and continue to do the work here and globally. I have no doubt that there my work will continue pretty much, maybe a somewhat slower pace, definitely, hope so. But one of the things that I'm involved in here, which just started, so obviously it will continue, is there's a creation of an indigenous university, virtual university, which is called Four Worlds Indigenous University, and its aspiration is to connect indigenous people from the four worlds and to create online, very affordable, very accessible courses that allow them to claim their legacy and also be exposed to the sciences and social sciences and really adequately pull forward. And so I was asked to develop one of the first courses for the university based on this book. So that's just one of many things that keep me anchored here in this land where a lot of work has to be done. So I'm not really leaving, but I'm taking a sabbatical, shall we say.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank you for everything that you do, and I have a question about your book.
Yes.
If, we talk to other people who are not in this room
Yeah.
about it. Where can you buy the book besides Amazon?
Besides Amazon, you can go, and I will send this information to Tom and ask you to send it to everybody. The publisher, Sacred Stories, has a website. You can order it from the publisher. You can order it from Amazon. Actually, most of the major book carriers do carry it. That's what I've been told by my publisher. It's gotten very high ranking, so it's generally available, but my thinking is yes, that's what I was told. All the major book distributors are carrying it now.
Would it be Barnes & Noble and here, Books A Million?
Probably, most likely, yes. Because my publisher specifically told me all the major distributors are carrying it now. But you have to try out and let me know if that's not the case. I hope it is.
Thank you.
Mostly because of Ken Wilber, of course. You're welcome. Everybody recognizes Ken Wilber, so. And again, there's 4 copies here if you want to buy a gift for somebody you love.
Yes.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments as we're winding down?
Thank you.
You know, I want to say how amazing it is for me every time. That's one thing I'm going to miss, and we'll see how it unfolds. Maybe there'll be other opportunities, but I've really enjoyed every one of these 3 meetings very much. It's so reassuring to be in a group of people who meet regularly once a month to explore these topics and to make their contribution.
Thank you.
I have an idea.
Yes, please.
You're going to Andalusia,
Yes.
okay? Muy bien.
Oh, qué bueno!
All right. But there is Zoom
Yes,
all over the world.
that's very
And
true.
we can hear your exposure de Andalucía y lo bueno que son la gente.
Oh, qué bueno.
Right?
Será mi gusto.
Yes, and I think you can share this to all of us. I think we would all want to know. Pat and I were talking earlier.
Yeah.
The connection of this group is unique, not just because of Ions from Petaluma, but the uniqueness that we do get together.
Yeah.
And thanks to Tom,
Yes.
I have to bring it up, Tom has held this group for 26 years. And we wouldn't be here if he didn't have that stamina and the vision, and that he knows and brings people like you to us so that we can have a global understanding of consciousness. And I thank you.
Thank you, and I want to join you in thanking Tom. It truly is an extraordinary work to do that over 26 years. Count the number of months, count the number of speakers, the reach, the breadth, and the consistency of that kind of spiritual commitment is quite amazing, and it's a wonderful example of the kind of work that we are all capable of now. It's a real spiritual commitment to keep us up.
Is this on?
Yep.
Thank you very much, Elena. That was really wonderful. And it's not by accident that my right arm was the one that got broken here. It's a lesson in receiving. From learning how to ask for help for others to dress me, to some things I've kept to myself, but most things I've had to get help with in recent weeks, and it's been quite educational and excuse me,
Humbling.
and humbling at the same time, but also, again, this kind of accolade that was just bestowed on me, I'm extremely appreciative of that, extremely appreciative of everyone here, everyone on Zoom and everyone who all through the years has supported our continued development with this group. And they don't get any better than the talk we just heard today from Elena. That's why we've been blessed for all these years to be fortunate to have people like her who've come along to keep us going. So thank you very, very much. Until next month, we have, let's see. Next month we have,
Speak right into the mic.
next month we have Ryan Chappell, who is a local energy worker. As a matter of fact, the night I broke my arm, he worked on me for about 3 hours, and did as he did the following day with the help of some others as well. It was a Friday evening when this thing happened, and it looked like a sledgehammer had hit me with on the X-ray. And the orthopedic people were very surprised to see that it was so well set that it did not require surgery, which I give credit to the others who helped me from the moment it happened for that outcome. Ryan is he's a really brilliant character, and he's going to have a talk entitled Being and Playfulness, the New Paradigm. What he's going to be talking about is how to elevate our consciousness from what we might consider astral level ideas to causal level ideas, and to how to embody those in our lives. In April, we're going to have Isabel Cristina Bolivar, who is a Colombian American bruja of some note, who has done a lot of good work around Richmond for a number of years. And then in May we have Susanna Redhouse, who is a Tascadero, California-based channel, who spoke to us about 9 years ago. She's going to be coming to us by Zoom, but she's going to be channeling the Council of One, which is consistent with what we've heard today. And then in June we'll have Dane Wigginton, who is in California as well, with the Global Geoengineering Watch, which is all about things like climate issues and so forth. We don't have it on here, but in July we're going to have Jim McCarty, who is the surviving member of the trio that brought us the raw material, the Law of One channelings back in 1980 to 84. So we got a great lineup for the year. It's not going to get any better than it got today, but it's going to be great all the way around. So we look forward to seeing all of you back, and anyone else. We got plenty of more seats in this room, so we can have a lot more people and still do social distancing to keep people comfortable to the extent they need it. And we look forward to having everybody back next month and thereafter. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
I was just asking if it was recorded, today's presentation.
Yeah, I think it was recorded, and we're gonna try to jazz up our recording availabilities, and because there've been a lot of requests for that. So,
Yeah, I'd like to pass it on. Is the reason
right. All right, folks. See you next time. Those in Zoom can hang around for a while if they want and talk, however you want to do it.